All right, good evening to you too. Uh, Damon Hodges, City Administrator. I have Russell Petry, which is our Finance Director. This is our budget forum. It's Budget 101. When Russ joined us a couple years ago, one of the things we wanted to do was to reach out to the public, not only to let them know about the budget process, which the numbers are typically presented in a committee as a whole meeting, which are the first and third Tuesday of August is typically when we do it, and so we wanted to reach out to give them a more sense of what the budget entails beyond just the numbers and how we put it together. And so Russ put together a presentation that explains that. That's why we call it Budget 101. So when they're watching the meetings and getting the actual numbers, they understand the concepts of why the things are coming from where they're from. So hand it over to Russ from there and go from there.
Well, hi, I'm Russell Petry. I'm Director of Finance with the City of Raytown. And tonight we have a small presentation that will guide you through the process of the budget of the city from start to finish, and a few little facts about the city as well and the way it functions. So we'll get on with the PowerPoint tonight. And we were working and now we're not. There we go. So the fiscal year of the budget starts on November 1st and ends on October 31st every year. Each year, as soon as all transactions and accruals are made, an outside accounting firm, which is a CPA firm, comes in and prepares the annual audit that you see that's published out on the website on the finance page. They make sure that we're in compliance with GAAP as well as all the state statutes and as well as our policies internally. The City of Raytown is a fourth-class city. Across the state, you'll see several different types of cities. Some of the ones you may be familiar with are charter cities, which is what Kansas City is. And a fourth-class city is a city such as Raytown, and Grandview is another one that is similar to Raytown as well. So the Raytown property taxes, every year when you get your property tax statement, you will see on the statement that there is a breakout of different types of jurisdictions that are taxing entities in the City of Raytown specific to the property you live in. So you'll see each one of those outlined as to what portion dollar-wise, and I think maybe even percentage on the statement that you get. But if you look at the pie chart, the city gets a very small portion of the amount that you pay in on your taxes on your property. That would be on your homes and your cars and other taxable items that are property tax. The city gets about 5.08% of the total tax that you pay in. And then as you can see in the pie chart, the slice at the top that's kind of separated from the others is the city's portion. The city has not pursued a tax levy increase since 1978, which is about 43 years ago. The City of Raytown runs on fund accounting, and what that means is that we have separate funds for specific purposes. Some of them are governed by state statutes. Some of them are separated just to make accounting easier and trackable. And some of them are just functional based. So the first fund you see in the list is the general fund. Okay. The first fund you see is the general fund. The general fund is the operating fund of the city. That's where all of the operational expenses happen. You'll see things like community development, the finance department, admin. You also see public works in that as well. And we're skipping ahead on this. So, okay. I would if I can. Okay, sorry about that. We had a little technical difficulty there with the slide. So the property tax of Raytown has not had an increase since 1978, as you can see on the slide. The real estate for 2020 was 0.4791. That includes the general fund and the parks together as a total, which is 5.08% of your total tax bill. So when you get your tax bill in at the end of the year, which is coming up here in November, December timeframe, you'll see a breakout on that bill that shows all the taxing entities that are within the city specific to your property. And the city gets 5.8% of that total that you get billed. On the pie chart, you can see it a little more visually. The top separated slice of the pie is the actual city's portion. And you can see the other taxing entities and then the proportional amounts they get. So the city is on fund accounting, which means that we have separate funds for different purposes. Some of them are state statute required. Some of them are to make accounting easier and trackable. Some of them are functional. So the first one is the general fund that you see on the list. The general fund is the operational fund of the city. That's where you see most of the departments sitting, and most of the expenses and revenue are kept there. You'll see departments like finance, admin, community development, public works, and the law, the court, the municipal court are several examples of what's in the general fund. So the day-to-day operations happen in that fund. So the revenues and expenses are tracked there, as well as the fund balance. Police department is partially in there. Yes. Yes. The other part of the police department is in public safety sales tax fund. So the Parks and Recreation Fund is exactly what it says. It's where all the parks revenue is kept and all the parks expenses. They are totally separate in their little fund there, and it's all kept separate. So we have a complete tracking of what happens in that department and what happens in the city's parks and recreation. Transportation sales tax. The ones that you see an asterisk beside are specifically designed sales taxes. Those are specific for the purpose that they're designed for. So this one obviously is for transportation related expenses. So the revenue that comes off of that sales tax is kept there, as well as any transportation expenses that are applied to those sales tax funds. The next one is capital sales tax. Capital sales tax was designed for capital purchases of the city. That includes equipment, vehicles, major capital expenses that the city has. And that is what the sales tax is for, and the expenses are kept there as well as the revenue. The next one is the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund, which is what we mentioned a little earlier. It is for any public safety improvement of the city. So it can be primarily for the police department, but it can be for other public safety improvements of the city. And all of the revenue for the public safety sales tax and all of the expenses that are put to that fund are kept there. Risk Management Fund. Risk Management Fund is any legal cost of the city that incurs, such as legal claims for about potholes and things like that. That's where those expenses are kept, and the revenues are kept there too, as far as insurance claims, things like that. The TIF Fund. The city does have a TIF area in the city, and that is right around where Freddy's, IHOP, Westlake Hardware, and all those little restaurants there, as well as the Walmart. All of that area is the TIF project, is 350 TIF project. And it's divided into two projects there. But all of the revenues are kept there, and all of the expenses are kept there, including the debt management for that fund. Stormwater Fund is exactly what it says. It's stormwater related expenses, and that taxes is drawn for that purpose. Capital Improvement Fund. That one is specifically for CIDs and community improvement initiatives of the city. So if we have any community improvement districts in the city, which we do have a few, those expenses are kept there and separated so we can track those separately and accurately. And last but not least is the sanitary sewer fund. That is called an enterprise fund. That means is that it has to operate on its own, it has to support itself, and it is based on fees for service. There is really no tax there that is applied. It is all revenues based on sewer fees for usage. All of the expenses for the sewer fund are kept there, including sewer treatment, any personnel that applies there, any equipment that applies there. All of those are kept there separately. Yes, ma'am. The question is on the pie chart, how are all the amounts to the different taxing entities decided? Each one of those entities has the right to present to the public for a vote for their tax levy. And so those all come before the public in a general election, and the city residents on whether they approve it or they don't. And so all of those entities present their increase or whatever they're doing with the tax, and whether the citizens approve it or not is what happens to it. So that the residents totally decide what happens there. Okay, the basics of the general budget. The budget starts with the finance department, and it basically ends with the finance department at the very end. The finance department initiates it. They get all the paperwork ready, all the tracking ready, and then we start that in May of every year, believe it or not. So the budget has to be approved by the end of the fiscal year, which is October. So there's a lot of work that goes into that budget during the year. Once the finance department prepares the individual departments' packages, they send those out to the departments to get their feedback on what their needs are for the next fiscal year, and what their plans and goals are for the next fiscal year, and how those tie into what the Board of Aldermen's plans and goals are. So each department submits that to the finance department. We compile it all together, and then we meet with each of the departments, and that is Damon Hodges, our city administrator, Missy Wilson, our assistant city administrator, myself, and several other people meet with departments to ensure that everything that they're asking for is, first of all, relevant to what they're doing, and second of all, we understand what the ask is and what the need is. After those meetings are done, we compile it into a document. The revenues are also budgeted during that time, and those are based on historical information of what's happened in years past, what we know that's happening with the economy, such as a pandemic, and also any trends that we're seeing. So those are all forecasting elements that come into play when the revenues are budgeted. So those are based on what we really expect to get in the next fiscal year, and that gives us an idea of what we can afford in expenses. Once those are compiled, the budgets are reviewed by the Committee of the Whole, which is the Board of Aldermen as a whole. They serve as a committee to review what the needs are. They ask questions to understand the budget just like we did. And then ultimately, it requires a full board approval before the fiscal year ends. That usually happens sometime in October. So the state of Missouri requires a balanced budget. That means that you have to have enough revenue or fund balance to cover your expenses. You can't exceed that. Otherwise, you're out of compliance with the state, and the state mandates that for obvious reasons. The revenues of general fund are determined by statistical data, just like we just said. Revenues and expenses for enterprise funds, such as the sewer fund, are based on anticipated cost trends. So there's a lot of work that goes into anticipating those fees because there's a lot of factors that come into play. Whether we're going to have a wetter than normal year or a drier than normal year does affect our sewer, believe it or not, because we have such a thing called infiltration in the sewer lines. When you have older lines They do allow some seepage into the lines, and we do pay for that treatment. That's why it's important to keep the sewer infrastructure renewed and repaired so that we pay the minimal amount on those sewer charges. The sewer fund also has to support itself, so we make sure that the revenues are going to support that sewer fund and also provide the necessary maintenance and repairs that are required. Expenses are calculated by each department based on historical data and what the current needs are. And as I said earlier, the finance department compiles all that data for the board approval. Once the board approves the audit, or not the audit, the budget, once the board approves the budget, it goes into a book that you can normally get from City Hall. It is available as a published book. We also put it out on the website so you can see it there electronically. So it's available in the two formats. So it's readily available to the public, and that's what happens right after the board approves the budget. And as I said earlier, the budget can be found on the city's website on the finance page. You can also find previous audited financials there as well, and any other financial data that is relevant to the city. The staff takes a lot of time putting the budget together. There's a lot of hours that go in. There's a lot of meetings that happen, and those are happening right now during this time period. And I can tell you that we've had quite a few meetings over the last few weeks according to the budget and getting that ironed out so we have a good budget to present to the board. The City of Raytown has earned, it says 2 on here, we've actually earned 3 in the last 3 years, distinguished budget awards. That comes from the Government Finance Officers Association. It's a nonprofit that we are a member of. And they have a panel of judges that review all of the submissions for their budget award. And there's a lot of criteria that goes into there. There's about 30 different points that they judge on. And each judge has to mark whether that part is there in our budget, whether it's satisfactory or whether it exceeds their expectations and what's expected. So it is a big deal to get that award, and we've gotten it for the last 3 years in a row, and plan on getting it again this next year. So if you have any questions, I'll be glad to field those at this point. The question was, what happens if we exceed in excess of their budgeted revenue? Is that correct? Okay. There's 2 things that can happen there. The city can find uses for that expense or that revenue that comes in that's not expected. The other part of it is that if it's something that is not a specific revenue tied to a certain thing, then we can let it fall into fund balance and use it for a larger project down the road. So there's 2 things that can happen there, but it is reviewed when we notice that, especially if it's a certain item that has a specific purpose. Then we're kind of required by the statutes of that revenue if it is earmarked for a specific purpose. Any other questions?
General question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm Jeanette Gentry, and I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
How does an item get added to the budget? Is that something that the BOA has presented and they've done it, or is it only coming from city administration?
It can come from the board. If the board has a specific goal and a certain thing that they want to add to the budget, they can certainly do that. They are the ones that approve the budget, so they could certainly deny something in the budget, and they can certainly add something to the budget if they.
As a citizen, if you felt that there was an opportunity Raytown wasn't taking advantage of it, and you're being told it's due to budgetary constraints, what recourse do we have to get that item looked at with sincerity?
Well, you know, there's several alternatives there. You can present the case to a member of the Board of Aldermen.
They've done that.
And the board can bring it up to the staff. They can also bring it up as a budget item to add to the budget.
And then my next question, you want to guess? I know you do, son. Okay, and then my next question
Yes.
is, uh, damn, I wish I had time to find the exact dates. But, the 20, I'm sorry, what budget are we getting ready to present? 21, 22?
21, 22, yes, ma'am.
So, when you were presenting documents forwarding for the BOA to look at for the 2021 budget, and it referenced allocations from the 1920 budget, and it said, you know, we had budgeted for 10 chairs, okay? How can I tell that that budget item was fulfilled, okay, when you're looking at the line item by you know, department?
Mhm.
How can I tell that that budget item was fulfilled? And then, carrying back onto that, after the budget was approved for this season, 2021 budget, there was this, you had went to the Board of Aldermen where you needed to do some allocations that were, you were moving money around, and it was all stuff that had already been paid. And it was a very large amount in administration. So is that number, because I think it was close to $1 million, is that then going to be reflected in the budgeting amount for the administration? Or they had only asked for 102 for this year, but with that reallocation, it was really 202.
I think I understand your question.
Well,
So,
because I know, but I know
okay.
yeah.
So when the budget is finalized, that is what we expect to happen in the next fiscal year, okay? In the current budget, like this current budget that we're in, the current fiscal year, if something is not expended, but we have started that expense, for instance, if we put in a purchase order for those chairs, but they weren't delivered before the end of the fiscal year,
Okay.
that money is already allocated towards those chairs. Make sense?
Right.
So at the end of the year, if we don't reallocate that money into the budget, it falls back into fund balance and we can't expend it in the next year. So that PO is sitting out there, but there would be no budget to apply it to because we didn't move the money forward. Make sense?
So in that scenario, if it was a budgeted item that just died, okay, there's no way as an individual I can tell and say, oh, okay, well, they decided not to do that, you know, and I agree with that or I disagree with that or whatever. There's no way for us to see where that money is, what they said they used and wanted it to happen for. Okay, didn't get the bill, you know, I mean, the website is an example. What was there one year, hadn't been done, and the new budget was approved, website wasn't done up, and then all of a sudden the website gets done up and you're going, what? And then
Okay, there's.
the budgeted amount for the website,
Uh-huh.
my understanding was that it was a lot less than what the budgeted amount was. So, you know, I'm just trying to follow the bouncing ball, and I'm not having a whole lot of luck.
Okay. So when you move money forward because it's not fully expended in the current year, you put that place marker in that budget for next year. That adds to the budget for the next year because we already said we're going to do it to the contractors that are involved or the vendors. Okay? So we're obligated to pay those because it's an ongoing expense. So we put that place marker in the budget so that the budget is increased so that we can cover it with the budget because we're not allowed to have expenditures over the budget within a certain range. Okay, so we have to have that budget amount in the next fiscal year when the bill comes in to cover it. So that's why we moved it there. If the expense turns out to be less, then the budget is just not, that portion of the budget is just not used. So there's two ways to see that, or you can see it in the current budget that's being presented because all of those line items have history on the expense lines. So you can see what happened in the previous fiscal years. So let's take chairs, for example. If the administration department was buying some chairs and you knew it was in the office supplies category, you would be able to tell in the current budget because there's history of previous years with that expense line. Okay? So you can see it there. That's one place you can see it.
You're seeing a number, you're talking like I'm able to see detail, like, I have, unless I'm opening the document wrong, I've not really been able to see detail.
It's down to the line item. I can, I'd be glad to meet with you and show it to you if you'd like.
Is the PDF being presented on the website?
Yes, ma'am. The other part is after the fact, if you need to request if something was fully expended or not, you can certainly do that of city staff. We're pretty transparent about those things. So if you want to know if something was fully expended, you can always call City Hall and ask, and we can get that question answered for you.
So then, to my second question, this reallocation that you did in November that had this large administration amount, when his budget comes out for this year, when he's saying this is what it is that allocation dollar going to be added to what he had already requested? So then, because it should look kind of wonky.
Are you talking about something that was allocated back last November?
Yes, it was, yes.
It would be reflected in the history column,
Okay.
but it wouldn't be in this next current year's budget because it's already expended.
Year to year.
Yes, you would be able to see it.
So it's going to be in there, this reallocation, this large amount.
You would be able to see that in the history.
I can go back to a previous budget and say that was the number, I had this number to it, this should be the number.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you for coming out tonight, and I appreciate your time, and I hope you learned something a little bit tonight. And if you have any questions, please feel free to call me at City Hall, or you can call the main number, and we'll be glad to get your questions answered.